Thank you, Robin. That was insightful. I know that a lot of my panelists have a lot to say, and they've prepared wonderful slides for you. Now, first of all, welcome all to the third energy panel for the day. And in this session, we're going to be looking at gas as a future fuel or just as a transition fuel. Now, we all know that coal and oil will be in the market at least until the 2040s. Now, however, the world is heading towards a cleaner, greener, healthier, and surely a more economically feasible future. Now, I'm not going to talk much. I'm starting off immediately with Mr. Ibrahim Al-Mohannadi. Now, in this session, we're going to be talking about the future. We're going to be looking at the now and where we can get to from there. So, if we are to expand the use of any product, and we're talking gas at the moment and LNG, there has to be certain criteria for it to be beneficial. If we are to design the future, how do you place gas in all of this? And I know that Qatar has a lot of experience, both as an exporter and a user of gas in its economy. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Onur. First of all, I thank you all for attending this plenary session here that we are doing. And I would like to thank the organizer, the ICP, for allowing me the opportunity, and the Abdullah bin Hamad Foundation, the opportunity to work together in bringing up the energy session here. Basically, I was thinking what to speak about, and since now the theme of this summit, since the theme of this summit is the design of the future, I thought maybe it's good to talk about some of the merits of natural gas that can bridge into the future as we move into an economy where it's a low carbon economy. And I know that the Paris Climate Change Convention is focused on establishing targets to reduce greenhouse emission. I believe that natural gas can play an important role, and we can, the policymaker can encourage, design a new energy system that will allow gas to really play an important role in the future. And Qatar, as His Excellency Mr. Al-Atiyah spoke about earlier yesterday, about the development that has taken place between the Qatar Petroleum in collaboration with its international partners in developing LNG and the role that LNG can play into the future. So I think if we are to choose a primary energy source that's going to play that role in phasing out fossil fuel over a longer period of time, my personal view that it's going to take a very long time to displace fossil fuel. And there are 1.3 billion people who are not having access to primary electricity. So there are priorities that have to be looked after, and it's going to take a long time to phase out fossil fuel. But I think my colleague Robin talked about a lot of the challenges that is facing, whether gas or some other sources, probably about the environmental concern and what needs to be done to meet these challenges. I think if we are to choose an energy source, and he alluded to some of the things I wanted to say also, to be honest with you, because we are converging to the same conclusion. If an energy source is to be selected, it has to meet certain things. First of all, it has to be available. And it has to be abundant so that it stays for a long time, that can support economical cycle development. We cannot start investing in a new energy source and we're phasing it out too short. So it has to be available and abundance, first. Second, it has to be affordable. It has to be competitive with other energy sources. And I understand when we talk about gas, there are some challenges when it comes to competing with coal and new investment that has to go into carbon capture in the future, probably, to maintain the environmental cleanness that needs to be done. The third thing is about accessibility and flexibility. This energy source has to be accessible and by all, whether it's through infrastructure, whether it's through electricity, distribution system. It has to be accessible, it has to be flexible. And then the fourth thing, it has to be environmentally acceptable. So this is what he alluded to, the 4 A's. The 4 A's, it's acceptability, it's affordability, it is availability and abundance, and it is affordability, accessibility, abundance, and acceptability from an environmental point of view. And when I think about this, I think natural gas is really meeting almost all these criteria to be a main primary source going into the future. And I will give you some examples. I tried to make a small research. I didn't do like what my colleague did. When you look at the reserves for natural gas, reserves for natural gas is almost triple since 1980. And I saw numbers which are close to 100 years of reserve. Still, with the shale evolution of natural gas, although some people call it a revolution, it's evolution. At the end of the day, it is gas, and I think it adds to the availability of gas into the future. And I think it's a good news when it comes to gas. At the end of the day, it is gas, which means we have more gas, which means that policymakers can really get the comfort that we have the resource that can support the world economy and the prosperity that many people around the world are expecting for many years. So from a reserve point of view, gas meets that criteria. It is abundant, and probably it is, in terms of number of years of reserves that is available, is quite large. Probably 3 times what it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And with shale, it's almost double in the last 10 to 15 years. It's also quite widespread, not in one geographical location globally. It is, for example, within the United States, worldwide, in the former Soviet Union, around 30%, and 20% in North America, 16% in the Middle East, 13% in Africa, and 6% in non-OECD countries. From an accessibility point of view, I think LNG has contributed a lot to the accessibility of natural gas. And this is where, I had the privilege of working in the last 10 years when I was managing Rasgas. I had the privilege of working through the joint venture in developing all these massive LNG projects in Qatar. And I saw the evolution of the LNG markets, coming and expanding day by day, and the usages of gas, natural gas, in different sectors. So LNG is really connected and really reducing the imbalances in the region for natural gas and increasing the trade for natural gas. Currently, it's roughly around 30% LNG, and it's expected to grow much faster in the coming years. So LNG has added to the accessibility and flexibility of natural gas. In the old days, even if it was LNG that was based on associated gas a number of years ago when Brunei and countries like that did, it was more or less like a pipeline gas. You have to sign the contract ahead of time, and there are no flexibility whatsoever. That gas going from one destination to another destination. You can imagine it was ships in the sea, it's pipeline at the end of it. Today, gas is a global commodity, and it is, even from the customers, really can build the infrastructure under the anticipation that gas will be available. So that has really provided much more flexibility and reliability to the gas system as a whole. The third point, the affordability point of view, and Robin has touched in more details about this, that LNG and natural gas is much cheaper than hydrocarbon, any other source of hydrocarbon. And when it comes the BTU value. But don't forget that gas also could be utilized in some other feedstock for industrial, for engineering, plastic, and others. So in the past, that source was competing with others. But now with the abundance of natural gas, I think there is a disconnect, and natural gas is becoming more affordable with the additional availability. When we talk about the solar and wind, obviously today we heard this morning that there is advancement in the cost and production cost of solar energy. But still, you know, natural gas is very competitive, and natural gas is much cheaper. But I think there is a lot of work to be done on the competitivity of natural gas to remain competitive in some of the sector, to keep basically the cost structure much lower. And Qatar is among the, and if not the lowest cost producer when it comes to natural gas liquefaction. And if we take the levelized cost of gas-fired generation, it is around $80 per megawatt hour, which is much cheaper than the solar energy. But the technology there's a lot of improvement on the technology when it comes. But I'm not sure when we talk about levelization cost, then you have to take into account the land cost, you have to take into account the full cost, the capital cost. And sometimes some of these numbers are really distorted because some countries are providing some incentive for some of the energy sources compared to the others. From an acceptability point of view, we all know that the natural gas is the cleanest fossil fuel. When it is burned, it emits much less, around 50% less greenhouse gases compared to, for example, carbon, and around 30% less than oil, and much less other much less H2S as SO2 and NOx compared to the other. So really, natural gas is really a perfect match, let's say, with some improvement that has to be done in the future on capturing carbon capture to make it, you know, much lower in terms of emission. Currently, it's the lowest fossil fuel in terms of emission, but I think carbon capture will be the future if you take the full cycle production. So Qatar really worked a lot on LNG. It's increasing now its production from, you know, there is a plan to increase production from 77 million to 100 million ton. I think the industry, the LNG business has become global. It's a good business. It opens up this energy, clean energy source to many regions and countries who are in need of this. It will remain competitive. It is currently competitive. It will remain competitive. It's growing in different sectors, in the transportation sector, for example, in the other sectors, which is the marine sector. It is growing, and there are and the capital cost for developing LNG is coming down. It has come down a lot. When we started these projects, the first trains were much higher, 2 million ton. Then we had the 4.7 million ton trains production, and then we had the 7.8 million ton, which is very large train, LNG. The cost has come down. The same with shipping. It's gone down from 135 to 165 And so economy of scale has increased, which is bringing cost much, much, much lower and making it available at a reasonable price to everybody. So I think LNG will play an important role as part of the primary energy mix for a long period of time. There is plenty of it. It is affordable, it is accessible, and it is environmentally the cleanest fossil fuel. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibrahim. We've heard the forays. Now, I would like to ask Ms. Belaifa Mahdjouba to come to the podium, and the question I want to pose to her is, in light of all that we've heard so far, how do you see the development of the gas market at the moment?
Thank you very much. Actually, the development of gas market have been presented excellently by Robin and by Mr. Al-Mohannadi. What I'm going to present is, can I have the slides, please? Is the development of gas market in the short term and long term from the perspective of Gas Exporting Countries Forum. But first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting our organization, the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, GECF, and the Secretary General, His Excellency Dr. Adeli, was eager to come. However, he was engaged in the summit of the gas export, the summit of the GECF, and he couldn't come, so I'm representing him today. So, can I have the slides, please? Okay. So the title of my presentation is Natural Gas, Fuel in Need or Fuel Indeed? And I should add, that is not the question. So we will see from the perspective of GECF, the development of gas market, but also the challenges for natural gas from our perspective and the credentials of natural gas to complement my colleagues who presented them very well, and also the position of our organizations towards natural gas role in the sustainable development. Well, this gives the picture of natural gas demand evolution and growth. It has been growing after a deep, I would say, decline. But the growth is still modest, and we are not sure if this, it will continue to grow, but we are still not sure that this growth will be enough to absorb the increasing, the fast growing supply. For the gas production, we have seen that it has been growing. So it is, it continues to increase from its current 3.6 TCM level, driven mainly by unconventional gas production that added the bulk of the supply to the world production, mainly from North America. However, despite the growth of unconventional gas production, conventional gas remains the dominant source of global gas, driven by GECF and also by Central Asia. And more gas expected to come, more gas production is expected to come to feed the new LNG supplies facilities that are coming, and as feedstock for petrochemical industry, and also to respond to the concerns of environment. It's not working? Okay. Now, a few words about the LNG trade. It has been addressed by the predecessor speakers. It has been growing very, very fast, 6% growth in 2016 to average 263 million tons, with Asia leading the LNG import. And this year, the growth is almost, so far, as of October 2017, the growth has almost doubled, so it's 11% compared to last year, the same period. and it is standing so far at 193 million tons, driven by Asia and European market. We have seen in some countries in Europe the coal to gas switching due to the high coal prices. A few words about the new LNG capacities in the world. So last year we saw the commissioning of almost more than 40 million tons of new LNG capacities, mainly from US, Australia, Malaysia, and the restart of Angola. This year, we expect by the end of this year the additional LNG capacities of 30 million tons to bring the total global LNG capacity to 384 million tons. Of course, we have the year witnessed some delays and cancellation of some projects which were expected to come or to see the light. Now, a few words regarding the price behavior. We have observed price convergence across the basins, which reduce the arbitrage opportunities. Now, when it comes to the long term, I would like to give a few words on the long-term drivers of the world energy demand. So first, in the next 23 years, population is set to grow by 1.7 billion people. World urbanization will grow by 10%, while car fleet is expected to exceed 2 billion cars. Furthermore, the capital income will increase by 82%, indicating a high level of standard of living. All these parameters indicate that there will be still demand for energy, as illustrated in the following slide, where we see that each energy source has its increasing trend with the dominance still of the fossil fuels. It's not working? Yes. And natural gas will be the fastest growing fossil fuel in 2040, with a growth by 1.8%, driven by industrial sector and transportation sector, and also by electricity generation, which will continue to, where it will continue to grow to reach 28% in 2040, representing the largest share in the power energy mix. The share of renewables, which is growing fast, will grow from its current share of 8% to 20% by 2040. We see that despite the rapid growth of renewables, still they are well below the gas share. Now, a few words regarding some uncertainties, challenges, but also opportunities that are posed by the market to gas industry. And here I have selected, focused on the energy policies challenges. Some of them are favorable to natural gas, and some of them are unfortunately lacking consistency. As an example, the EU energy policy failed to let gas occupy its natural share in its natural sector, which is power generation sector, and the recent history has shown how gas had rather competed with coal, but not renewable, defeated by the economics. Cheap coal displaced more than 53 BCM of natural gas in the power generation sector in the period 2012-2014. Another challenge for natural gas, which is that is unfairly priced. These charts show that the market prices of oil, gas, and coal based on energy equivalent basis, and we see that this price failed to reflect the credentials of natural gas over oil and coal. In fact, these prices need to include the premium of natural gas that considers the environmental credential of natural gas over oil and coal, the efficiency, the safety, the security of supply, the availability in terms of base load. We heard from the previous presentations that natural gas needs to be competitive with the renewables. However, we are not in a perfect competition market, in the sense that renewables, when we compare with renewables, there are some hidden costs that are not included, which are the integration to the grid cost. So, and also the intermittency of renewable, where natural gas has the flexibility to be in base load and peak load. These features of natural gas have been presented by the previous speakers. It's just to show in some figures that natural gas is less CO2 emitter. It has zero particle, almost zero SOx, and very low level of NOx. And these are the pollutants which are not good for air, which are affecting the air quality and not good for the health. So if a measure needs to be taken to clean the air, improve the air quality, is to go for gas, because it has a short-term effect on human health. Also, another feature of natural gas is that it offers complementarity with renewables. The combined cycle gas turbines are the most effective, most efficient. And in addition, natural gas enjoys many advantages when it comes to the support of sustainable development goals. Of course, you may say that gas is criticized also for the methane leakage. Yes, but this is not a feature of natural gas. It's just a matter of best practices and lessons learned in the industry. Let me conclude my presentation with the three slides, which gives the positioning of GECF in terms of promotion of natural gas in the frame of sustainable development goals, and in the frame of, particularly in the terms of protection of environment. So the climate issues are integrally incorporated in our legal documents, in our statute, in our summit declaration. We just finished the last declaration in Santa Cruz, and I will give you a small update on that, which reiterated the importance of natural gas and the importance of combating the greenhouse gas emissions. In our ministerial resolutions and in our vision and mission of the long-term strategy of the forum, which has been published, and also consistently in our research work. This is an example of how we raised our voice as GECF to the COP21 and to the environmental community by indicating that the importance of environment protection, but also the importance of having gas as a fuel to support this target, but calling also for investment in the gas industry, which is very highly capitalistic. At the end, this picture gives the results of the 4 summits we are holding every 2 years. All of them are calling for gas as the answer of the 21st century for sustainable development. In the 3rd summit, it was natural gas fuel of choice for sustainable development. And the last summit of Bolivia, natural gas, clean and reliable resource for global sustainable development. So in conclusion, what I can say, which has been mentioned already by my colleagues, is that gas is here to remain, to support the growth of the humanity. Gas is compatible with the Sustainable Development Goals. Gas is a quadruple A asset. And gas is a destination fuel. It is not a transition fuel, but it is fuel that helps the transition to clean economy. So the concepts are different. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Okay, thank you, Belaifa. We're running very late on time, and I know that the next panel is very keen to get underway as soon as possible. So I would like to ask all my panelists to try to avoid overlapping issues when you're responding your questions and presenting your speeches. I want to ask Sarvar now, Sarvar Gurbanov. I know he's got a historical outlook on the gas market, and he's going to be talking about how, if he thinks, will history repeat itself. Sarvar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ICP and Al-Atiya Foundation for inviting me to this distinguished event. So, can we get this? Yeah, the presentation is there. Very good. So I will try to keep it, just short because, But by the way, Onur, thank you very much for announcing my surname correctly. Because while I was in university, there was a professor teaching us. Whenever he walked into the classroom and can't remember my surname, he was saying that, where's the Mr. Gorbachev? Where's the Mr. Gorbachev? So as Mr. Gorbachev is a very famous figure in our geography, so I'm thankful to Onur for keeping the pronunciation correct. So let's move ahead and ask this question. The answer of this question is really giving us a lot of insights about, the future of energy sector. The very first one is that, I want to mention, as Mr. Trump has been, elected as the President of the United States, and he's not very fond of free trade agreements. So the course, which is Korean and US free trade agreement, the relatively smaller free trade agreement. So actually, Mr. Trump is complaining about it. He's complaining about NAFTA. He's complaining. He already killed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and so on and so forth. As you see in this historical, detail, in the 1930, United States, the President of the United States signed the act, Smoot-Hawley Act, and it created a huge retaliation against the United States. So whatever we make, especially whenever we are making a calculation about the shale gases importance on the world energy market, we assume that the trade liberalization is continued in the United States. So here's the question, my very first question. What if history, repeat itself? Is Mr. Trump is going to be next Hoover? So he's going to, reverse all these liberalization activities. I think it's the very first question that we need to include as a variable to our, discussions about the future of oil, because everybody is citing United States shale gas production as a potential threat to the competition, and it's going to aggravate the competition. So once Mr. Trump can reverse everything back, so then new dynamics will start to function. The another one is I'm going to talk about the Netherlands experience. As you know, in 1969, in the Netherlands, they found natural gas. So when they found natural gas, there was that kind of expectation. In a very soon, there will be alternative energy resources, so gas is going to be useless. Let's, as much as, we can, extract it, sell it, and try to get rid of the gas, because in 1970s, they think that there will be a strong, and reasonable substitutes to the, natural gas. So their natural gas is going to remain on their possession, and they are not going to sell it. So only after the first, global oil crisis, I mean just the first oil shock in 1970s, the Dutch policymakers understood that actually there's a long way to go for the, just the alternative energy resources. So again, we are going to ask the same question. So does history repeat itself? I mean, alternative energy resources are there, still they have a considerable amount of importance, still, they can do, just replace that. So I got it from the Economist's 1977 microfilm, the version. So they coined the Dutch disease. As you remember, after this heavy selling of the oil on the global markets, it generated, Dutch disease. And the last one is, couple of weeks ago, I met a primary, the industrial leader. So the senior economist from this multinational company told me that they are ready for the, they are preparing themselves for the end of the oil. And very soon after the oil, so the end of natural gas is going to come. So as a oil company, they are preparing themselves, for these events. So look at this one. You see, there is just the additional hope that maybe history is going to repeat itself on this one, because previously the oil price has gone down that much, so maybe it's going to happen again, because as you know, the gas price chases oil prices, not the other way around. So the hope is that oil price is going to increase, and then the natural gas prices are going to increase also. So why, as you see, there are some events, maybe they are feeding expectations about the oil industry is going to end very soon. For example, Norway Oil Fund, as you know, recently the Norway Oil Fund, which it's the wealth of oil revenues of Norway has been accumulated, and it's hit to the $1 trillion. I mean, just one fund, and they decide that they are going to stay away from the oil and gas companies. They are not going to buy the oil and gas companies' stocks anymore, but it's just a drop on the big ocean. And especially if you see that Stanford University, so they say that they are going to stay away the conventional ones, but Stanford University's fund is just only $24 billion. But unfortunately, these kind of things are feeding expectation. So they are as it happened in the Dutch, just the case in 1960s, they are feeding expectations that in a very soon we are not going to able to sell oil or natural gas. But when it comes to LNG, in the last 10 years, we can conclude that the industry giants, they invested more than $700 billion. So right now, because of these heavy investments, the LNG market is buyer's market. So these big guys are producing huge amount of LNG, but they need to find buyer, because the main LNG ports are on the Western Europe, but the demand is not there. So there's a misperception actually. When you look at the Western Union and Western European side, you see that there's an oversupply of LNG, but on the other side of the world, like Vietnam, like Pakistan, India, you see that they are in they are suffering from supply. So as you see that my colleagues are mentioned about this one, and there are projects that the demand for natural gas is going to increase more than other conventional fuels. And as you see that there's also electric power and industrial sectors, they are making the 75% of the increase of the consumption. So which means that we can't actually exclude them. So they will be there, and whenever we are going to discuss the end of natural gas or LNG, so we need to take into consideration. So, I mean, we have some practical issues. Think about German example. In Germany, in the last 15 years, consumers are paid, more electricity bill, just because the government need to subsidize renewable energy. But the issue is that the German consumers, they are paying 3 times more than the US, the consumers. So the recent polls shows us that German voters are not, happy with these continuing subsidization. Okay, so it's another issue that we need to take into account. So by the way, during this time, we need to know that the demand also may change. Think about UK. So, I mean, just in a very, in last 10 years, you see that the UK was net exporter in many fields, but right now they are net importer. So some countries today, right now, they are net exporter. So they may be the net importer. So which means that it's going to put additional pressure on the demand side, which also we need to, take on top. And as you know that in oil-rich countries, there's a huge energy-intensive sectors. So because of these energy-intensive sectors, sometimes they use that especially on OPEC countries, the consumption is out of control. And Chatham House from the UK, it's a UK-based think tank, so they think that if Saudi Arabia is going to continue with this pace, in the 2038, they are going to be net importer. So as you see that the time passes, everything is not remain the same. So demand side also is going to, just to get bigger because of these additional, pressures. Thank you for your attention. Okay.
Thank you, Sarvar, for that. Now I would like to turn to Mr. Vladmir Feygin. Two questions in one. Now, we've heard of the pros and cons of gas and how it is operating as a transition. Now, the question is, will natural gas be a bridge to clean energy? And also, when you consider renewables, will the role of gas shift to being a standby fuel where there is no sun, or where there is no wind, or where there is no water to produce an alternative source of energy?
Thank you. I will try to just respond to it, and I will try to be rather brief. I will not repeat all pros which were around this panel. I share them. But we need these pros many decades before. But gas advantages were well known. Nevertheless, if you look at IEF projections for many years, the share of natural gas in their future projections was absolutely stalled, 20%. Why? I will tell my understanding of that. Then it was a report called Golden Era of Gas. Under some conditions, we're told. And now there is again a concern whether natural gas will realize its potential or it will be beaten by renewables from others. So there will be time spent for natural gas. One of the reasons for that concerns, from my understanding, is that even very recently, the natural gas supply and natural gas reserves were very much concentrated in very few countries. And we know all of them. Yes, it was United States, but for internal use, it was Russia, it was Qatar and Iran. And it was concern among the consumers that if global gas supply will rely on very few countries with some problems in each of them, let's say, then it will not be reliable, it will not be sustainable, and so on. But a lot changed. We know about United States, but more of that. Now we see a large number of countries who are producing and who will produce. In Mediterranean, in United States will be gas exporter, even Israel, Tanzania, and so on. So it will be much more diversified, and therefore, from this position, it is ready to be real global fuel. That's my view. Next, LNG is an additional component to this because it helps to fill niche markets. It well combines with pipeline gas, and the demand is for both. Currently, 39 countries they are importing LNG. Only recently there were 20 of them. So it is really again diversifying. The gas trade, international gas trade, will not increase, I believe, as far as rapidly, as sizably as gas production and demand, because more countries will be producers and consumers, and that balance will change and so on. But that's, again, good from the point of view of security. Now let's come to this potential contrast and comparison with renewables. Gas storage, you know, it is not cheap comparing with oil storage, let's say, but it's very well developed. It is very known technology, and this provides stable flexibility to energy markets already and in future. What's about renewables? The cost of electricity storage, you know, is declining, and there are projections that it will decline twice and so on. But my understanding is, when you look at the cost structure, yes, it will be competitive, but for short-term storage, let's say day and night, which is important for renewables, yes, but there is a lot of demand for seasonal storage, as in Turkey, for instance, because of fluctuations, because of seasonal swing, and so on. And so, therefore, there will be very significant demand for gas filling that role at backup. Regarding CCS, of course, CCS combined carbon capture storage, of course, it will be perfect. If CCS at competitive costs are available, gas is unbeatable. I'm not sure it will come soon. It is very slowly developing, but it is not a tragedy, I will tell you, because even in these conditions, gas will take its share because it is much cleaner than many other alternatives, it's cost competitive, and so on. So, trying to just make my own conclusions out of the question which was raised at the title of this session, I will tell you that definitely gas will increase its role on the horizon, let's say 20, 25 years, or maybe longer. And it is a reasonable time frame, let's say, because we see how rapidly all this technology is changing. And I think it would be too ambitious to tell what will be the efficient energy mix on 2050. No, maybe somebody is brave enough, I am not. So it will change, but gas will be will play an increasing role in this time frame. And from that point of view, I think it is a destination fuel because, I will repeat, it is very difficult to look 40 years ahead with so intensive technological innovation. It looks like at the moment that dozens of thousands of researchers in dozens of countries were intensively working on all components of increasing this efficiency, of finding fuel to get fuel out of CO2, all of that. Each day we get it. Let's follow it. Technology will bring us surprises. But with all these uncertainties, gas is a very good basic fuel, flexible fuel. Everything is provided already now for gas. So I am very just reliant on gas, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladmir. The last question of this panel will go to Mr. Trevor Whitten. We've heard everything so far, but one theme that kind of is underlying in everyone's presentation and answer is costs and affordability. We've heard about the linking of oil and gas prices and how it affects decisions to make investment. Sarvar mentioned consumer prices and how they get affected. What is your outlook on the near future in seeing gas as a way forward?
Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon. And again, I must just thank the Al-Attiyah Foundation for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. I will be very brief. I know we're pushed for time. To focus on costs and the affordability, which I've been asked to do, I'm going to abbreviate my remarks and try and bring everybody's contributions together rather than repeat them. First of all, the gas fundamentals, context and scale is very important. This is a $1 trillion business that we're talking about on a global scale. Growth is absolutely fundamental to the gas business. We've heard the statistics from Hamad and others, but there are some important variations. Europe, for example, is not Asia. And those variations are very important when we come to look about the question that we've been talking about, which is fuel, whether this is a transition fuel or a destination fuel. Gas is certainly displacing coal, and to focus on costs, we all know that power generated from gas produces a lot less carbon, but I think there are some other important cost elements that we haven't spoken about yet. For example, heat efficiency has to come into that as well. A considerable amount of less water is required in the process. Water is a scarce resource in itself. We mustn't overlook the environmental impact of the SOx, NOx, ash and particulates, which have knock-on impact in terms of costs, because they create health problems. Health problems have to be funded. All governments are struggling to meet health bills, so that's a cost in itself. Another important cost that I would identify is the footprint of CCGT power generation relative to coal generation, for example, is probably a quarter. That's not just cost of land, it's where you can put it and its environmental impact to society in general. So there's a very small footprint. It's a quick build gas-fired power station, so there's less disruption. It's off-the-shelf technologies. It's a cookie-cutter technology these days. A frame 5, frame 7 CCGT set can be knocked out by the Chinese. They're building one a week, or they're commissioning one a week. So there's some important cost elements to address your specific question. We must also look at cost in terms of societal cost, and I think we haven't mentioned the important COP21 markers of 1 degree, 1.5 degree, or 2 degree reduction against pre-industrial limits, and the costs involved in meeting those targets are considerably different, and gas has a role to play in all of them. Gas I see as a bridge to a renewable future in 3 different ways, 3 cost ways. First of all, it meets the dispatch curve, peaks and troughs. It can be very quickly mobilized, turned on, used to fill those troughs in the morning and the evening on a diurnal cycle of power demand. The second bridge is when there's no sun and no wind, it's there. It can be switched on very, very quickly. It has black start capability. You need it, you have it. Unlike coal, it can take 3 days to set the boiler going. It's the third part, I think, as a bridge to a no-carbon world, which is as a destination, and this is very important if we include carbon capture storage in the gas equation. Now, believe it or not, I think I'm right in saying there are only 2 people in this room that have first-hand experience of carbon capture in the gas world, and that's 2 of us sitting here. From Algeria as the only real example where carbon is taken out of the Insala field and recycled as carbon capture. And Sonatrach should be very proud of being a first in that. So that's an example of what can be done. Finally, coming down into costs in terms of diversity and flexibility, Hamad mentioned there are a billion people plus in this world without access to clean water or power. LNG as a form of gas is a very, very flexible destination, flexible fuel, startup fuel. The FSRU capability is giving us the ability to kickstart very quickly an economy through providing those essentials and, if needed, move on elsewhere once it's become established. So that has an important cost dynamic. Finally, in terms of costs, something that resource holders are changing. A resource used to be something that you have or you hadn't, and you need, and you know how to use. And the game is changing. Solar and wind don't belong to anybody. Essentially, they are a resource which is free once converted. So it's bringing power to the people, if you like, in 2 different ways. Physically, it brings power through solar and wind-generated electricity, but it's also as a resource as well, which has been absent in so many people's lives. Finally, just to say, as a word of warning in terms of bridge, for big reserve holders, I've spent the last 6 or 7 years in Qatar, so I know about big reserve holders. And the old mantra used to be, we need to spin this out, it's a fund for future generations, we have something that's going to be there and provide livelihood for everybody to follow. But I think we need to look at that in some detail in gas as a bridge, because it is just possible that if the COP 1.5 degree scenario is adopted, there isn't going to be much of a role for gas beyond 2030. If it's 1 degree, then it's not going to be much of a role between 2025. This has incredible implications for the investment and payback periods of CCGT, for example, which typically take 10 to 15 years to remunerate. And if you don't have that certainty, you're not going to push the investment button in the first place. And if you have pushed it, you may end up not running this plant at all. Look at Europe, plenty of examples. UK, Belgium, 50% of the fleet capacity sitting there doing absolutely nothing. We need to avoid that because that's a waste of resource. Also, we've heard a lot about demand and supply security, supply risk in gas as a resource. Personally, I have never seen a supply risk in my 40 years in the business. All supply disruptions have been mended in days. It doesn't matter whether it's been Gulf Wars, Iraq Wars, Iran, Algeria's, anywhere. They have never actually interrupted supply. Sure, it's readdressed, the price has spiked, price is the market mechanism of dealing with it. But what has got to come now in terms of is security of demand. Security of demand is the key thing, because if you don't have demand, you don't have the incentive to go out there and invest, and that's the uncertainty. And business, nature abhors a vacuum, business abhors ambiguity. It's got to have certainty to make that investment. So my final point then for big gas reserve holders is, do you want to run a Walmart strategy or a Harrods strategy? Do you want to pile it high and sell it cheap and take revenue and make that investment into your third economy? Or are you going to take the sort of Harrods approach with very large margins and very low sales turnover? So I just leave you with that thought today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Trevor, and thanks to all of the panelists in this session. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions or answers. I thank you once again, and for you who have listened for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all our panelists. I would like to invite Mr. Cengiz Özgencil, founder of ICP, to deliver the awards. Thanks.
Ben bu arada çok kısaca Sayın Alatiya Vakfı'na, Sayın Alatiya nezdinde çok teşekkür ediyorum. Bu sene başlattığımız 5 yıllık bir anlaşmayla her sene inanıyorum ki üzerine koyarak bu enerji günleri UİP'in gücüne güç katacaktır. Tekrar bütün konuşmacılara, sabahtan beri bu enerji konusundaki katılımcılara çok uzak yerlerden geldiler. Hepsine ayrı ayrı teşekkür ediyorum. Thank you very much. Ve Sayın Alatiya'ya bir daha teşekkür ve saygılarımı iletiyorum. Teşekkürler.
Thank you so much. Teşekkür ederim.